How does a business work financially? You really want to develop that muscle. If you don't have that understanding of really how accounting or financials work in a company, it's very easy to run into big problems, right? Not understanding kind of how cash flow works. That's a real critical piece to understand. Business is all about the customer and what that customer needs and wants. Having a really deep understanding why that customer is buying what they're buying and why your product would or service would be superior or why they would buy yours.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Walk to Wealth podcast. If you're tuning in on YouTube or any of the podcast directories, make sure to do yourself one teeny tiny little favor and make sure to give us a follow because I don't want you to miss out on any of the amazing guests I'm bringing on this year. Without further ado, let's get right into this one. Chris, for anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to get to meet you yet, tell us your elevator pitch. Who are you and what do you do?
Oh, hey, thanks, John. I appreciate you having me on the show. Chris Younger, I am the CEO for an organization called Class Six Partners, and we're a financial services firm, uh, all focused on entrepreneurs. And so we have an investment bank that manages exit transactions and capital raises for them. We have a group called Pathfinder, which consults with those businesses before they go to the market. We have a family office that manages money for them on the back end. And then we have a small equity fund that we help some of our Pathfinder clients with in terms of accelerating their growth. And so, like I said, all of our clients are entrepreneurs, and we have a ball.
Yeah, amazing, Chris. So before you got into where you're at right now, take us back in the time machine. What was little Chris like growing up? Were you always an entrepreneur? Like, where did this story begin?
Well, I did start mowing lawns when
Okay,
I was a
okay.
kid, and I knew that was the best place because I was making about four times as much per hour as my buddies working at McDonald's. So that turned out to be a pretty good strategy, and then I ended up actually going to law school
Wow.
and started out as an attorney in Silicon Valley. And while I enjoyed the interface with the clients, I didn't really enjoy the actual work. So I ended up leaving the law firm after a couple years,
Okay.
and then went and worked for an investor group out of South Dakota, of all places, to do a roll up in the communications industry. And so I started out as the deal guy and we did 27 acquisitions over a couple year period. So it was pretty intense and pretty active. And then the CEO with that business, a guy by the name of Jim Walker, brought me on to help lead strategy. And then ultimately, I became the COO and president of that business. We had built it to a little over $1.2 billion in revenues. And then we sold that business to Avaya, which is a big communications company, in 2003. Tried to retire for a couple years. That didn't work out too well. And and then started with my business partner. We started Class Six back in 2005, and they have kind of grown it since then. We started out just had a couple folks, and then today we have about 45 employees across the different businesses. And like I said, as Warren Buffett says, uh, he gets to tap dance into work, and I feel the same way. I get to work with entrepreneurs every day, and there's just nothing better.
Yeah. So let's take it back to the beginning. You said you started off mowing lawns, right?
Yeah.
Around what year was this? At least in terms of
Uh,
like not years and year. I mean, how old were you? I mean, at this time.
oh, I must have been 12 or 13, big
Okay, so
enough to
pretty
push a
early.
lawnmower. Yeah, big enough
Yeah.
to push a lawnmower. And, ended up I would just pick up more and more lawns to mow as
Yeah.
I got older. And that worked out pretty well.
Okay, dope, dope. And then going into school, you ended up going the law route, which is very different than what you have going on now.
Yeah.
Was like business and investing and acquisition, was that something that was like always kind of in the back of your mind that you were kind of interested in? Like, where did the interest in that kind of come into play? Because that's a pretty significant career switch.
Yeah, I was always interested in it. Invested in stocks while I was in college, and even in law school. The law firms that I interviewed with and went to work for during my summers, and then the permanent job out in Silicon Valley, I really tried to pick law firms that had a lot of business exposure. So I did a
Hmm.
lot of corporate work, and the work that I did in Silicon Valley was with a lot of young companies.
Yeah.
These were all startups whether we were doing capital raises for them or general corporate work. And like I said, I loved working with the entrepreneurs and the businesses. I didn't like the documentation aspect of legal work too much, but
Yeah.
and I don't think I was very good at it.
Yeah, okay. And then from there, you got a call to head over to South Dakota, right?
Yeah,
To
yeah,
start.
it was. A buddy of mine from law school and I were going to do a search fund, which is basically you raise money to pay for your living expenses to go look for a business to buy over a couple year period. And he and I were going to do this together. And while we were out looking for capital for that, we came across this group that said, well, we're not going to fund your search fund, but we'd like you guys to come work for us and help us invest our money. And so that's what we did. I did that for, I guess, 4 years until I
Mhm.
joined Exponets, which was the communications company.
Yeah. And then from there, you were in that for quite some time, try to retire. And what was it that made it impossible, or not impossible, made it how difficult for you to retire? Was that entrepreneurial spirit that kind of just wouldn't die out?
I learned a couple things during that couple year period of time. One is I wanted to stay married,
Yeah.
and I was organizing my wife's spice drawer, and she decided that I needed to go find a hobby. I think I was uh, uh, not in her good graces at that time. The other thing that I learned that I think is true for a lot of entrepreneurs is it was really disconcerting to wake up in the morning and not have something driving you.
Yeah.
And that was, to me, it didn't feel very good. And that was one of the key lessons that I learned was, I need purpose. I need to be serving others in some meaningful way. And the work that we started doing with Class Six just allowed me to scratch those itches and do it in a way that uh, benefits hopefully a lot of entrepreneurs. That the mission of our business is all about helping entrepreneurs because we not only respect and regard them, but we also really appreciate the role that they play in our communities. And it's
Yeah.
I think that entrepreneurial spirit is really what makes this such a great country to live in, is because we've got these opportunities and people willing to take those risks and put it all on the line. And here in Colorado and for most of the country, young businesses are the ones doing the most of the hiring
Yeah.
and are responsible for most of the economic growth. And so we really feel it's our responsibility to help them in any way we can and help them realize a really good return on all the time and sweat and stress that they've invested in their business.
Yeah, well, that's a really big good point because I was as I said before we hit record, I just came back from Guatemala at the time we're recording this not too long ago, and it's like the amount of people out there that have the little pop up shop or little tent with a literally just a desk and some like fruits or something like that, and they're all out there just trying to make ends meet, but opportunity wise, it's nothing like what we have here. Like
Yeah.
they'll never have an opportunity to go raise capital out there, right? There is none of that stuff or get money or make a 7, 8, 9 figure exits. They're just trying to sell some fruit for the day so they have enough
Yeah.
money to go home and make their ends meet. And it's very different, and that's why I love leaving the country. This is my only my second time, but first time I went to the Dominican Republic, I have family in both parts, and it's like so when I was out there, I wasn't like in a hotel cooped up. I was like really out there and with the people, and got to experience the culture firsthand, and it's very very different. It just makes you so much more grateful for everything we do have here in the States. And it's like a lot of people out there are entrepreneurial. They have that spirit, but the opportunities don't match what they have inside, and it just makes it super difficult. And I think this is a great segue to kind of really start getting into like entrepreneurship because as I mentioned before we hit recording, like I was really curious over the last part of 2023ish or so about why is it that some businesses you know without ever getting a client can easily raise six, 7, 8 figures, and other business owners who say start up their own business and they have to work hard and find themselves trapped in a job where they're their own boss. And it's just like, I guess to start there, like what have you seen from the mergers and acquisitions in startup space, and like like other more DIY type of entrepreneurs? Like, what tends to be the main difference?
It's a great question and something I think is important for every would-be entrepreneur to think about. Part of it, I think, has to do with what the intent of the entrepreneur is. For a lot of entrepreneurs, they're doing it to basically replace a job that they currently have, and they want to do
Mm,
it either because it provides them more flexibility, more autonomy, maybe it's more fun for them. And there's a lot of businesses where I call them lifestyle businesses, where it's basically it provides a really good living for the entrepreneur, but it's not necessarily going to scale or be able to attract capital. And whereas, hey, Silicon Valley, right, we saw this a lot where you might have a couple of entrepreneurs start a business, go out and raise venture capital. And I think it all has to do with, hey, what's the perceived level of opportunity in that business for growth?
mm,
And for a lot of the businesses that attract capital, those are what venture capitalists believe at least have the potential to be. It's unlikely that they will be, but at least have the potential to be billion-dollar businesses. And
mm.
so the venture capitalists make a lot of investments across hundreds of companies in order to hopefully get
Yeah.
the few hits that actually make the fund returns for them work. But I think almost all of it has to do with what's the growth potential of the business. And for a lot of lifestyle businesses, hey, the growth potential of that business based on the owner's intent is
Yeah.
probably not that significant. Whereas for some of these businesses that raise capital, they have, at least in concept, much greater growth prospects.
Yeah. So then let me ask you, because like I know for me personally, when I got into like entrepreneurship, I wasn't your traditional entrepreneur, like with the paper route or mowing lawns, right? I
Yeah,
didn't have that in me growing up, but it was mainly because my brain wasn't oriented towards business for whatever reason. I had a lot of those traits playing sports and doing a lot of things that I was doing. I just never had the time to, or the interest to start a business. But then once I did get into like the entrepreneurial space, I realized that I had spent a lot of time building up these traits and these habits that were very entrepreneurial. They just weren't being applied to business at all.
yeah,
And for me, I paid $500 for a course. It was on real estate wholesaling, and that's essentially, well, before that I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, but like my
yeah,
first investment to like starting a business was I paid $500 for that course. Then I bought my LLC. I got my domain name, my logo on Fiverr. Hired someone a graphic designer to create the logo, and then I was ready to get it going. Like that was how I started. I never even knew about like private equity. I knew it a little bit just because while I was in school before I dropped out, one of my friends was in finance, so he told me a thing or two. But aside from that, I really had no knowledge about the private equity space in the startup world. It was like a completely foreign language to me. So I just started my business. I paid for the course, and I was like, all right, let me figure something out. It's like no credit needed, no cash needed. And all you have to do is be 18. I was like, all righty, I'm 18. I don't have cash, don't have credit. Let's get this party started. And that's like how I got into business. Uh, from what you've seen over your time, like what are like the intentions going into like business for like a more traditional like startup entrepreneur? Like what's the differences between, as I said, someone like myself who kind of just got a little spark and was like, all right, I'll kind of just start something up, and versus someone who's like knowing they want to raise some capital to start a business?
yeah. It's interesting for a lot of the clients that we work with. These are folks. They're they're not technology businesses that are raising a bunch of capital from outside investors. A lot of our clients are entrepreneurs who've built, whether it's a manufacturing business, it could be a technology business, but almost all of them have been self-funded. They have just grown the business organically. And it's interesting. During COVID, I interviewed probably 30 or 35 of our prior clients just to ask them these questions about, tell me your story about when you
Mm-hmm.
started your business and how did that happen? And what was amazing to me was how many of those stories there wasn't any big master plan. A
Mm.
lot of them, hey, maybe they got fired from a job, or maybe they got frustrated working for somebody else. And so it was really their uh, kind of desire just to do something different with their lives. And the other piece that was illuminating for me, at least, was one of the biggest common denominators across all those folks was they all had numerous, near death experiences with their business, but they all had such persistence. It was whether it was they couldn't fail. Hey, if they failed, that meant they couldn't feed their families,
Mm-hmm.
or they couldn't fail because they had taken investment maybe from friends and family, which is, so sometimes that's the easiest capital to access, but
Yeah.
it's also the toughest capital to have.
Yeah.
Just because the pressure on you is tenfold what it would be if it were just your own money.
Mm-hmm.
And so they just had this, I can't fail attitude. And as a result of that, that led them to really good success. And most of them have, they obviously, once they reach our firm, they've had a certain level of success
Mm-hmm.
to be able to go exit at some level. But those common traits were the ones that I saw. It wasn't necessarily some big master plan. It was
Yeah.
kind of just trying to do things better day by day by day and try to serve customers better over and over and over again.
Yeah. That's actually like really interesting to hear, because it would seem as if they come in from different, like, with a different perspective or different vantage like viewpoint, but it seems like they started their business for the same reason that other people start their businesses, right? To escape the rat race, for get a better
Right.
opportunity, right? Because they don't like a job, for example, and they just were able to thick it out, and then the opportunity presented itself, where they could exit. And so let me ask you, before I ask the next question, like, what is an exit for anyone? Because as I said, a lot of people don't know that you could sell a business. Like, usually your business, you're selling a product or a service, but like a lot of people don't know that you could actually sell the business itself. It's like, what is an exit?
So if you're an entrepreneur and you've built your business up to a certain level, for to sell your business to institutional investors, you've got to be of a certain size. You probably need to be earning profits of $2 or $3 million a year for them to be interested. But at that point, you, in order to earn profits at that level, your business likely has pretty good infrastructure. It likely has something that's attractive to customers.
Mm,
I like to say investors are interested in companies for the same reason that customers are.
mm-hmm.
And if you find a customer that is, uh, if you can identify why the customer likes that business, you will likely identify why an investor would want to own that business. And so that, when you think about kind of businesses that are scaled to that level, that are generating those kind of profits, then it really comes down to what are the growth prospects of that business going forward, and how risky are those growth prospects. If there's still a lot of growth left in a business and future revenues are highly predictable,
Yeah.
then those businesses are going to be worth a lot of money, and somebody will buy them.
Yeah. That's amazing. So then, to follow up on that, how can someone, for example, let's say someone, just got out of college, they want to start up a business, they paid $500 for a course, right? Despite whether or not they wanted to sell a business in the future, how could they go about starting their business with the intention to sell, regardless of whether they want to sell or not? Because I think you could go at it from a very different perspective. When you're thinking of, all right, how do I make this something that's sellable? Even if you may not want to sell it, I think you come at it from a different, very different angle. So, like, how would someone start a business with the intention to sell?
I think the biggest difference between entrepreneurs who are going to manage the business as a lifestyle business and entrepreneurs who are going to try to create a scalable, saleable business really comes down to how they view their role. For a
Hmm.
lifestyle business, the entrepreneur likely believes they need to do most of the work.
Hmm.
They are going to be the ones who are doing most of the selling. They're going to be the ones doing product development. They're the ones that are going to be managing operations. They're not thinking about the business as an investment, as something that needs to exist independently of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Entrepreneurs who are focused on building a saleable business, it's all about, hey, how do I build a team and systems and processes such that this business could exist without me having to be present every day? And those entrepreneurs, you just make different decisions. You're likely going to sacrifice short term profits for long term equity value creation. Um, and what I mean by that is, if you're a business that makes three or $400,000 a year, in order to scale, you're going to have to hire people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that means instead of having $400,000 in profits, you might have $100,000 in profits, but your opportunity to grow that business long term is so much greater because you've built that infrastructure. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
probably the biggest difference between entrepreneurs who just want a lifestyle business and entrepreneurs who are interested in building something that's scalable so that they can sell it down the road.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a great way to put it, because I feel that it's very different between like being self-employed and running a business.
For
Like,
sure.
even though they're both businesses, how you run it. And for me, so like for me, my big aha moment, and I don't know if you know the book, it's called The E-Myth Revisited.
Oh yeah, sure.
So I read that book. I think it was like mid 2023, around like maybe like April Mayish time. I forget when I read it, but then I was reading that book, and then for anyone who hasn't read it, essentially it talks about this one guy, the narrator, and this lady who has I think a bakery, if I'm not mistaken, and how she started her bakery because she loved baking or something like that, and she started a business. She opened up a bakery shop. And then from there, they were doing well. It started growing, and then she started hiring, some employees, and then from there employees were kind of slacking off, so she started doing the work of the employees. And next thing you know, she had employees that she was paying for, but she was doing the work for all of them. And then the bakery was started doing bad, and next thing you know, it ended up failing. But then the narrator kind of comes in, and he kind of shows the pitfalls and explain why things went south and how she should have fixed it. And reading that book, um, the big aha for me was an organizational chart. Never seen anything like it before. I didn't even know what that was, but I was like, oh, I'm doing a bunch of tasks. If I group some of these tasks, those are roles, and I'm doing all of these roles for my business. So I don't have one job of running a business. I have 15 jobs that are all kind of umbrellaed under my quote unquote business that I'm doing. So I'm not working one job, I'm really working 15, but it's a cover up as one because it's my business. And so
Correct.
from there, I was like, oh man, I gotta get out of this. I can't keep doing this. And then this past year, I made my first hire, which was a video editor. And it was the best thing I ever did, because that, with a podcast, like this interview right now, we're already 23 minutes in at this point. By the end of it, it's probably gonna be like 40 after the intro and outro, 45 minutes or so. And now I'm posting about 3 podcast interviews a week. And on top of that, I post a bunch of reels. All that content takes so much time to edit, especially to make it look nice. And it's like, regardless of whether you try to triple speed the video or not, like you're not getting through a 40-minute podcast interview and in a short amount of time. Like
Right.
it's just impossible. So it's like it eats away so much time in doing that. It allowed me to become a little bit more of that business owner instead of being so trapped in the day to day. And that's what kind of gave me the aha. So, like, what would you explain for people who don't want to give up that control? Because a lot of times, especially when you don't come from much, like you may have, trust issues where you don't want to trust in other people, or you may have a bunch of different little limiting factors or beliefs that are kind of getting in the way of you being able to really grow and scale. So, what advice do you have there?
It's a John. Those are great observations. Those are uh, exactly. I think the E Myth is a great recommendation for folks to read.
Mhm.
Um, we always encourage business owners to make a list of everything that they're doing,
Mhm.
um, and then track that time that they're spending on each one of those tasks over 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Which is it's kind of a pain in the butt, but it gives you some insight often into exactly how are you spending your time, and then look at those activities. There are going to be certain activities that you hate doing. There are going to be certain activities that are not adding a ton of value to your business. And there are going to be certain activities that you're not very good at. What we always advise clients is to look at if the activity that you're, that's taking up time is not adding any value to your business, you shouldn't be doing that, right? So those are easy to eliminate.
Mm.
For the activities that you don't like, but that still add value, or the activities that you're not very good at but add value, you absolutely will benefit from finding someone who loves doing those things and is
Mm.
much better at it than you, because it's highly likely that in a business that's successful, that business is successful because that entrepreneur is doing something really, really well.
Mm.
And what you're trying to identify is, based on the activities that you're doing really, really well, can you figure out ways to do more of that? Well, the
Yeah.
only way you can do more of that, just like you did, is to eliminate some of those activities that, hey, maybe you're not as good at or don't enjoy as much. If you can eliminate those activities, that frees up space to do those things that are adding the most value to the business. When we
Yeah.
see entrepreneurs do that analysis and bring in resources, just like you did, it actually helps the business grow a lot faster. And more importantly than that, it makes the entrepreneur a lot happier because they're spending less time on stuff that they don't like or that they're not very good at. And no one likes spending time on stuff that they're not very good at. So it's a good exercise, just like you did, is to, hey, of those 15 jobs, there are likely jobs that you don't like doing or you're not very good at. And somebody
Mm.
else is likely going to be better at. Great, let's find somebody to go do that. And so just doing exactly what you just did, I think is a really good lesson for your listeners on, hey, how do you build a scalable business?
Yeah. So I kind of want to ask you on the same like topic, because one of the things that I always heard growing up, like if you want something done right, get it done yourself. Like do it yourself. Like what's your thoughts on that quote? Because I feel like that's one that's like very common that holds a lot of people back.
If you're going to try to grow a scalable business, that's you'll never get it done with that philosophy. You have to build a team. You've got to build a strategy. You've got to trust in that team to execute the strategy. Find the best people you can, and I've watched this in our own business, and I've watched this in countless clients' businesses. When you build that team of really capable people, they're going to do so much more, and they're going to be able to grow that business so much faster than you would be able to do it on your own. Are they going to do it differently than you would? Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why you hire them, is
Mm.
because they're going to be creative. They're going to come up with new and innovative ways to do it. When we bring on a new team member on our firm, I usually sit down with them on the first day, the first week, the first month, and the first quarter. And all I'm doing is quizzing them on, what have you seen in our business that doesn't make sense? What are you seeing in our business that you would do differently? Because you benefit from getting that new experience and fresh perspective. And
Mm.
most entrepreneurs, a lot of entrepreneurs have they're challenged with that, whether, hey, they don't trust somebody else or whether they
Yeah.
believe they're the only ones that can do it. The ones that have figured out that other people can do things better are the ones with the most successful businesses.
Yeah. And that's definitely a great insight. And I wanted to touch on a part where you said how bringing in another fresh set of eyes really helps. I really like that idea. And sometimes, like for example, my girlfriend, she'll ask me, she'll tell me about like a couple ideas that she thinks I should be doing with the podcast, or I should try doing, and it's very different because one, she doesn't really listen to podcasts that much very often, so it's like, but she's on social media very often, and she sees other people's podcasts on social media, but doesn't actually listen to them. So it's like she sees what other people are doing with their marketing, and it's one of those things. It's like she thinks of a lot of stuff that I wouldn't even consider, and sometimes I could be a little resistant. But I'm finding myself like the less resistant I am, it's like, all right, let me see where she's coming from. And some ideas I try, some ideas I don't. But it's like the ones I do try, it's like, oh, okay, like this is a pretty good idea, and I never thought of it that way because I actually listen to podcasts. I see things a bit differently. I see the world a bit differently, and having that the outside perspective really does help. So you mentioned too also that the businesses that figure out that other people do things better than them earlier on tend to have more success long term. What else are you seeing? Like, what's the big differentiator that gets people to the point where they are investable? Like, a lot of people can grow a business, 50, 60, 70K, right? That's like regular salary right there. And some people, yeah, all right, now you're like touching 100 to 200K. And it's like, all right, now your business, like, you're making really good money from there. And then a lot of businesses don't really scale past that. Like, my dad is in that range right now with his landscaping company. And he's been at that range for, I think, like about a year now, but doesn't really have plans to like grow further. So it's like, what helps people start, scaling to those higher numbers, and those bigger numbers.
It really comes. I do think it comes down to risk tolerance
Hmm.
for an entrepreneur because growth is risky. It takes investment. It takes commitment. You
Hmm.
are going to make bad hires. You're going to bring
Yeah.
people on who don't work out, and that's part of the game, right? You have to expect that that's going to be the case 30, 40, 50% of the time.
Hmm.
Um, but the ones that persist through that and are willing to take that risk and are willing to make the investment in training and development of people in implementing processes that help people do the right things, they're going to build scalable businesses. The ones
Hmm.
that, again, where they're doing most of the work, they're not really saleable because it's just the person, it's just that
Yeah.
entrepreneur, and they're so critical to that business. But you have to, in order to get to those higher levels, you are going to have to take on additional risk. You're going to have to hire people. You're going to have to make investments, and you're going to have to come up with a way to make that business more, allow it to grow faster. And the only way to
Yeah.
do that is with people and processes and systems in place.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to try out this a little exercise, right? Let's say you're starting a business in an industry that you're not too familiar with. Like, um, let's say you wanted to open up a candy shop. You want to get it to 1 million in revenue. What would be your strategy before you even started the business to get that idea off the ground leading up to it?
It's a good question. I think part of it is just understanding the market.
Yeah.
Hey, if I'm trying to sell $1 million worth of candy, I'm going to have to compete with a whole bunch of other companies that are selling candy.
Yeah.
So, what's different about mine that would attract customers? Am I
Mhm.
doing something unique? Is it valuable to a customer? What could I sell my candy for? How much margin could I generate? Those are
Yeah.
I would be looking at the fundamentals of the business first before I would ever start one.
Yeah.
I think the other piece to understand is what does it take to actually have a company that's selling $1 million worth of candy? You're going to need to have equipment. You're going to need to have people. You're going to need to have a space. All right. Well, if that's the vision 3 or 4 years down the road, what does that mean I have to be doing today to get to that level? And what types of investments am I going to have to make?
Mhm.
So those are the things that I'd be looking at. I think those are the things that most investors would look at is what's the market potential?
Yeah.
Why do you think you're going to have an edge in the market? And then what does it take to actually get to that edge?
So let me ask you a question because I see that a lot of times people they get into business and it's like, especially now, like the movement of people who have like this abundant mindset. It's like, there is no competition. Whatever is meant for me will flow towards me. And yes, it's true to an extent, but it's like some of these things like why are people going to buy from you? Oh, because I'm me, they're going to be drawn towards me and the energy I put out into the world and whatever. But it's not really a strategy, right? So it's like,
No.
does knowing what other competitors are doing, right? Because a lot of people say, it doesn't matter what the competitors are doing, stay in your own lane. But it's like, why is looking at the competitors important when starting a business?
I mean, ultimately, you're competing for a customer's dollars, right?
Hmm.
A customer's only going to buy so much candy in our example. So the question becomes, why are they going to buy your candy versus a Snickers bar or candy from Enstrom's or another candy shop?
Yeah.
And that has to be part of the analysis because if there's nothing differentiating yours,
Yeah.
As a young company, your cost structure is going to be radically different than an established company. It's your costs are going to be much higher on a per unit basis. For every piece of candy that you sell, your costs are going to be a lot higher than established competitors, which means if you don't have something that's different about your candy, you're not likely to succeed because again, you're not going to be able to compete with those established competitors.
Yeah. And then you mentioned another key point there too, a little earlier about the fundamentals. So like for anyone who doesn't no, is new to business, A, or needs a refresher, or C, is looking to start a business soon, like what would you say are the fundamentals of business that one should know prior to getting into it, regardless of what the business is?
I think there's a lot, right? Getting a kind of a core understanding of accounting. Hey, how does a business work financially?
Yeah.
You really want to develop that muscle because if you don't have that understanding of really how accounting or financials work in a company, uh, it's very easy to run into big problems, right? Not
Yeah.
understanding kind of how cash flow works. That's a real critical piece to understand. And I think the second piece is I do think, I mean, business is all about the customer. It's all about the customer and what that customer needs and wants. And so having a really deep understanding of why that customer is buying what they're buying and why your product would or service would be superior or why they would buy yours, I think is also, you've got to have that understanding. I think if you don't, um, you're likely to spin your wheels or worse, run out of money. And so those are the two things that I would focus on first. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in business, right? In terms of, hey, how do you build a scalable team? How do you think about your cost structure? How do you think about marketing? How do you think about sales? All of those things are important, but those two fundamentals I would start with just because that'll at least help you stay out of trouble.
Yeah, no, 100%. So, Chris, you dropped a lot of nuggets today from, the difference between companies that grow and scale versus others that don't, lifestyle businesses versus scalable businesses, the fundamentals. You dropped a lot of nuggets today, man. Where can we connect with you? Where can we find you at to learn more about what you guys have going on over at Class 6 and keep up with you?
Sure. Yeah, you can find us on their website, www.class6, class VI is the Roman numeral 6, partners.com. So www.class6partners.com. And I'm at Chris, CHRIS, at class6partners.com if you want to email.
And quick question, just so that the customer, the listeners can get some hope, some aspiration, some motivation. What is the minimum, like in terms of profit per year number that you're looking for in companies and that you partner with and invest in?
Yeah, for us, really, a company needs to be earning $2 to $3 million in profits before we would, be appropriate.
Yeah.
And so that's really what we're looking for, and all the attributes that we just talked about: businesses that are scalable and that are well run and have good systems and people and processes.
And I want listeners to take one thing away: how easily he said $2 to $3 million. Right? It's not because it's a unicorn number. There's businesses out there that are making that per year
Oh yeah,
that they're
lots of them.
investing in, and it's just like we got to find those businesses and learn what they're doing so that we can get there. And that's where I'm aspiring to be as well in the upcoming years. So super
Good.
excited to stay in touch with you, Chris. But now it's time for the famous 5 questions. Question number one: what is the most impactful lesson you've learned in life?
Most impactful. I do think it's there's a book by Og Mandino called "The Greatest Salesman in the World," um, and one of his tenets is, "If you persist, you will win." And while sometimes persistence can get you further into trouble, I do think that most people give up right before they're going to be successful. And so, as bad as things can be in business, and look, business is tough. That whole notion of just persisting, I think, is a real critical one, and one that I think everybody would benefit from.
Now, this may or may not be the answer to the next question, but the second question is: what is the most admirable trait a person can have?
Integrity, which is pretty clear. I mean, it's Charlie Munger, who just passed away. He was Warren
Hmm.
Buffett's business partner. He used to say, "Don't do business with turkeys," and I think there's a lot of truth to that, right? You want to deal with people who are straightforward and direct and good people. It'll make your life just a lot better.
Yeah. So, what does he mean by turkey? By turkey,
It's
what's a turkey?
Yeah, people of low integrity,
Oh, okay.
dishonest, unscrupulous, etc.
Okay. All right. Question number three: if you had to change someone's life, but you only had one book, which book would you recommend?
It's actually Charlie Munger. There's a book called Poor Charlie's Almanac,
Hmm.
and I've given it to all my kids. I give it to our team members. It's a collection of talks that Charlie Munger has given, and he
Hmm.
has some just unbelievable life advice.
What is the legacy that you're working on leaving behind?
Other than family and good kids, the other one that I'm really working on with Class Six is we're trying to build a large community of entrepreneurs, both entrepreneurs who've been successful and exited their companies and now have lots of money, but entrepreneurs who are just starting out.
Hmm.
And our goal is to provide and build a community of high quality entrepreneurs that are there for each other.
Hmm.
That comes from just this understanding of how important entrepreneurs are to the community and to the success of our country.
Hmm.
And so our goal is, hey, how can we help more and more of those entrepreneurs over time?
Amazing. And final question is for anyone that wants to embark on their walk to wealth today, what would you recommend the first step?
Really assess what's
Mm.
important to you. Identify, hey, I'm a big believer that the goal of getting money um, is it won't sustain you in the long term. You have to ask what that money is going to make possible that's not possible today. That will help you sustain. And so being just really clear on what you're trying to accomplish and why, and make sure that you can reduce that to things that are going to continue to motivate you when things are really, really challenging, which they will be.
Amazing. Chris, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for dropping the nuggets that you did and just coming on the show and having this conversation with me.
You bet, John. Thanks for doing what you're doing.